Afternoon, Tony Abatini coming from Frozen Ropes University in Chester, New York. Another episode of Beyond the Ball. We are excited to have, think about this, Jim Kaat, who pitched in the big leagues for 25 years. Hall of Famer. Was also the pitching coach for the Cincinnati Reds. He's also been an analyst for the Minnesota Twins, the New York Yankees, CBS, ESPN, TBS, and the MLB Network. He'll be joining us to talk about pitching, to talk about throwing, and so you want to be a broadcaster at some point in your life. Jim Kaat is also going to be able to give us some input on that also. So stay tuned for this tremendous episode with Hall of Famer Jim Kaat. I appreciate you giving us some time to talk about life and baseball and throwing, and I've got to ask, right? We're going to start with a topic that I know you and I shared our thoughts with last week on your podcast.
Sure.
And you and I can talk about this topic for a long time, Jim, but what's going on with throwing and pitching in this world, Coach?
Well, you want me to go now?
Yeah, I want you to go, Jim. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think you opened my eyes quite a bit when you talked about the Mariano Rivera story about trying to throw from the mound and then throwing like a shortstop or an infielder. And I never, until recently, separated the two where people, and I think a lot of coaches today, are, because they have no big league pitching experience, they're teaching kids how to throw mechanically right in their minds.
Yeah.
But they don't really teach them how to pitch. So there's that blend. And I think with young kids, teaching them how to throw, I didn't realize it at the time, but when Johnny Sane had me go to this, what they call a quick pitch motion in the mid-'70s, where I stood facing the catcher straight on and just took a step and throw. Now, I saw the other day where a Twins pitcher thinks he's going to pitch from the stretch, no matter who's on base, and that's going to be more rotational. So I think the challenge today, and I don't know if we can do it, is to convince people that they need to throw more like an infielder, throw more like on a linear plane, step and throw to the target. And I think a good drill for all organizations of pitching coaches, again, this is probably fantasy, but if you took a pitcher fully warmed up and you put him on the mound and said, okay, here, throw me 10 fastballs and don't try to overthrow, but just see what your velocity is. And then I'll roll you a ball, and from that same position, 60 feet, you throw the ball to home plate and see which one registers to have more speed. And I think the one where you step and throw like an infielder will have more speed, because I think that's what you found out with Mariano.
There's no doubt, Jim. And based on our conversation, I came up with a new way of throwing. I was going to call it the Jim Kaat throwing, but how about this one, Jim? Right, we're going to call it the grab and go. Right, when we're at the airport, when we need something to eat real quick, we just grab it and go. Right.
Yes.
So I'm talking to a scout the other day, and he's asking me, Tony, take a look at this pitching delivery. What do you think, man? We're just not seeing all the length and all the gook in the noodle in the back. And I said, you know what? I don't think that's a bad thing. This guy is just grabbing it, and he's letting the noodle, as I call it, just simply work, and he's not getting the body too involved too early in it. But yeah, Jim, to your point, I think for the amateur world, because it's a lot easier to help the young children because of the lack of politics that go on. And you're right, that the Mariano Rivera story, it changed how I looked at throwing. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
And that's what, when Johnny suggested that to me in the mid-'70s, there I was, 35 years old, and thinking my career's over. And we went to that, what at the time was a really radical move. And when you take it from the throwing into the pitching, the benefit that I don't think coaches realize and even pitchers realize, and I didn't until I had somebody like Brooks Robinson tell me, he said, you've got an extra foot on your fastball this year. I said, no, Brooksy, I don't have an extra foot on my fastball, but the ball's getting on you faster. See, the hitter, as he said, and all hitters will, when the pitcher starts his motion, they start theirs.
Yep.
So with the grab and go or step and throw, they have no timing mechanism to start their, I had more hitters step out of the box on me because they weren't ready. And so, I milked that for a good several years from 1974 on. It revived my career and convinced me that this was the way to throw. But to try to go up against traditional teaching that I pitched like in my 20s, it's hard to sell that. I think I mentioned before Larry McWilliams with the Pirates. He did it for a while with success, but my motion came out of desperation. But the best way now with kids is just roll them a ball, or even if you didn't roll it, if you just picked it up like Warren Spahn taught me to condition my arm, pick it up, hop, step, and throw it off a wall. You referred to wall ball. Just pick it up, hop, step. Another exercise you could do is play catch while you're on your knees.
Yep.
Put about a dozen balls. If you're a lefty, put about a dozen balls on the ground outside next to your left arm. Get on your knees and just pick one right up after the other and just throw it to a guy about, say, 30 feet away. And that tells you that, the noodle, as you say, that's doing the work. And I think we've got to get back to where, and I argue with Jim Kaat, who's really into the mechanics of every single part of the kinetic chain, is that you hold the ball in your hand and your fingers. So whatever you do, the body will follow that. And one of the examples I use is that if a bug or a butterfly flew in front of your eyes, instinctively, what's the first thing you do? You don't move your feet, your hips, your shoulders. You move your hand. And Thomas Hanna wrote a book called The Body of Life. Bob Tosky, legendary golf teacher, gave it to me years ago about how the brain sees the hand bigger than anything. And so that's the challenge of being able to teach pitchers now to do what they do when the ball's in their arm, as you said, grab and go, and just let the body find its way and follow what the hand and arm is doing. But we've got it all backwards now. We've got all this hip turn and rotation and the way they stand on the rubber, and we've forgotten about the main thing is you hold on to the ball and you throw it with your arm.
It's interesting, Jim. A coach asked me a while back why what we call wall ball or step and throw or the transition you made, why does that work? Why does the arm feel better? And I explained to him, I said, it's all about timing. Okay, when you just simply step and throw, and we know that, a critical part when the pitching coaches are looking at video, when the stride foot lands, it's very telling as to where the noodle needs to be. I call it on the roller coaster. Where is the arm in time and space when the foot lands? Because we know not many human beings can delay the throwing of the ball. Once the foot lands, message to the brain is, I got to get rid of this thing. I think we'd agree with that.
Yes.
So when you're playing wall ball, or when you get rid of this big stride equals more power, the front foot lands sooner, like Brooks Robinson throwing the ball over, or the high-level shortstop, or Mariano Rivera realizing, I'm just going to put my foot up and then just simply put it down again. Now all of a sudden the arm and the foot are better timed up. This is what's missing with the kinetic chain theorists that continue to look at the delivery, in my opinion, and other outliers in the business, Jim, backwards. They're trying to drive energy up from the ground when now the more contemporary, old school, new school, I don't even know what you call them anymore, they're saying, you know what, we've got to start talking about top down, and our good friend Paul Nyman.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it took me. I wish it's the old Bob Seger tune. I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. Or something.
Right.
I wish I knew when I was 20 what I now have studied and figured out, and talking to guys like you,
Yeah.
and even Jim Colonel, though I might not agree with him. I'm finding out for myself, because I might be one of the few that experienced both. That was a traditional. Turn your back pocket to the hitter, rotate horizontally, throw that way, and use the legs, versus pick the ball up and use the arm, as you would say, top down.
Yeah.
And, the proof for me was at my age, 35 and 36, I pitched 590 innings, 580 innings maybe in 2 seasons with that motion. I never had one iota of arm stiffness, soreness. Started every 4 days, sometimes every 3. So the proof for me was how it worked. And I don't know if you took a camera from a side shot when the plant foot hits.
Yep.
Does the hand have to be almost in line with the foot? I mean, that's probably where you could look at it and find out from the picture. Am I letting the ball go too soon, or is it flying high in a way you could probably get some feedback and help yourself out with your control?
Well, typically when pitching coaches will look at that, whether it's the grab and go or the more traditional lower half, when the front foot lands, the elbow has to be up and kind of in a layback position, ready to go. That's what they're looking for when they do the traditional video analysis, Jim.
Uh-huh.
And so you're right. You don't need a video camera to feel, boy, I didn't really feel a lot of pressure on the elbow shoulder when my arm was ready to launch when the foot lands. That's why shortstops and position players, because their stride length is not so out of control. And you can also tell by trajectory too. I mean, I'm guessing that on days in which you were feeling pretty good, right? You're a tall pitcher. You're standing on a mound, and when you're getting, quote, on top of the ball to an extent, you've got pretty good trajectory coming down. I'm guessing both on your fastball and on your, what some people would say might have been your best pitch, your curveball.
Yeah, I think in studying over the years, we heard these. Tom Seaver had this classic motion called drop and drive. And then we would hear coaches, push off the rubber. But the more time went on and I analyzed it, it's kind of like Warren Spahn said, you're on top of that mound and gravity takes over.
Yeah.
And the top part of your body just sort of drives itself like you're driving your nose into the front of the mound, into the dirt, So you're pitching more, as you said, top down.
Yep.
And infielders have that advantage of taking a hop, step, and throw, which is a great exercise for pitchers. I saw Justin Verlander warming up before going out to pitch a couple innings the other day in an inter-squad game, and he was doing that hop, step, and throw, and then he went to his pitching position. Louis Tiant and I used to do that when we were teammates with the Yankees. We'd start out about 60 feet, we'd back up, hop, step, throw, hop, step, throw. We'd end up doing that well over 100 feet, trying to throw the ball on a line. It also, I think, is a way that, I don't know what the kinesiologists would say or the physicists, but I actually think that by doing that exercise, I picked up a little velocity.
Well, Jim, there's no doubt, and it's interesting. We mentioned about Paul Skeens last time that we talked. Arguably one of the best arms that are out there, and you see him just simply pick it up, put it down. He's driving shoulder core into the ground, and I think a lot of that gets back to when the arm is feeling good, we're driving the energy from the top of the body straight down into the ground. That's why whether you're playing shortstop or catching, you'll see that front foot brace, right? You'll see the braking action, and it's much easier to teach, hey, you got to put the brakes on so that the lower half can receive all this energy that's coming in from the top. And the best way to do that, to your point, is by having a catch. Because half the time when these young pitchers, are trying to have better sequencing, right? Overdo the hip rotation early on, there's never a braking action. Their lower half never receives the strength that's coming from, I call it from the heavens or from the top.
Yeah.
But when you're playing wall ball or when you're playing grab and go, whack, that front foot gets braced and braked, and all of a sudden that energy has a chance to get into the ground and be used effectively to throw.
And not to make people think that when you pitch the way we're talking about, when you throw in a linear fashion, there is some hip turn. When you see it, there is some hip turn, but it's not exaggerated. I mean, you can't just step straight with your torso wide open and not have any kind of recoil there at all. You're going to end up getting some bicep tendonitis. So there is a little turn that automatically happens. You don't have to try to make it happen. I was looking at Skeen's motion from both the home plate and from center field, and Mariano the same way. But in your mind, it's a step and go, but your body is automatically going to turn a little bit. And then, as you said, you put on the brakes. That's why I learn, and I sound like a doctor when I talk to people about the antagonistic muscles in the front of the torso.
Yeah.
They have to be strong enough to put the brakes on and absorb the shock.
Yes. Well, and Jim, to your point, no one is saying, I'm not saying, and the throwing pitching coaches that I believe are the elite ones, they're saying, the lower half is going to rotate, but don't force the issue. The body knows when the hips need to turn, and you watch the Skeens, you watch Rivera, you watch their better ones. It's a late rotation. It's not an over it. It's the same thing with hitters. You watch all good hitters. No one's squishing the bugs. The guys that you played with and some of the best ones, you would barely see them turn their hips, whether it's the scissor kick or guys like Clemente, that their foot was off the ground. But internally the hip joint was firing after the upper body said deliver the barrel, or for pitching, hey, we're going to throw this pitch. Let's now use the lower half to take some of the stress off the arm, not the other way around, using the legs as the power source.
I think looking back, what we did, I was pre-Little League, so I did a lot of just playing with my buddies in my hometown of Sealand, Michigan. We'd have, say, 8 of us, and we'd go out and play 4-on-4. But we played catch a lot, and I think by just playing catch from whatever distance we could throw when we were 10 or 11 years old, we kind of ingrained those kind of good habits by just playing catch. We didn't find a pitching mound, throw off a mound. We're just on flat ground, picking up a ball and playing catch with one another, and your body follows your hand and arm and develops those good habits.
Yep. I know last time we spoke, Jim, the challenge that parents have and coaches have, just telling someone to go out and have a catch and throw isn't sexy. It's not profitable, and so many families, when they come visit us in New York or San Diego or even Knoxville with our partners at 108, well, what do you mean we're going to spend a few weeks just learning how to throw?
Yeah,
that's the problem. It has been ingrained in them that they need to learn how to pitch first, which segues back into if the noodle doesn't work, putting someone on an incline and asking them to now throw it, within the parameters of 17 inches to plate, we've got it backwards.
That's what Paul Nyman, when I first read that interview you did with him, and he said the quickest way to ruin a pitcher is to teach him to be a pitcher. And I had to scratch my head when I thought about that. And now when I think about learning how to throw and then learning how to pitch, I understand exactly what he means. See, I run into so many, one of my neighbors, their kids, they have one of their sons, I guess he's in his 30s, and he coaches baseball, and he has a school. Mm-hmm. And we were talking pitching, and he said, balance over the rubber, turn the hips. And I wasn't going to get into an argument or two, but that's what we're up against, because that's what I was taught as well.
Yep.
you stand in front of that mirror and balance on your back leg and try to get that balance over the rubber when in reality, the old, whatever it would be called, an axiom or something, that a body in motion stays in motion.
Yep. So
the grab and go, and when I did my quick pitch, the reason that hitters had trouble with it is that the ball got, my motion started and it never stopped. I didn't turn, stop, pause, stop. It was just one continuous motion, and they weren't ready to adjust their, loading up with the bat to, they got plenty of hits. I remember when Joe Morgan, we were at a midwinter banquet in Chicago. I was getting an award, he was getting an award, and I just got traded from the White Sox to the Phillies. And he said, we hadn't met much before, and he said, I'm talking to the league. He said, I think your motion's illegal. I said, really, Joe? I said, you look at my stats from last year? I said, I pitched 304 innings, and I gave up 305 hits. So I don't think it was too illegal. Now, a lot of those hits were singles. Right? Yeah. But yeah, so the results I had, it confused hitters, and it was a big advantage because the ball, they just didn't have a timing device. So yeah. I think I wish there was somebody that would come along and maybe through desperation would have to stop and say, I got to try this because I know how well it worked.
Well, Jim, if you think about it, and again, we need to in the industry, we look at the big boys who play Major League Baseball. That's the top of the food chain. And there's good information there. But you're seeing more and more guys now throwing from the stretch. The days of, the Jim Palmer, Sandy Koufax, Juan Marichals, the legends of the game, you got starters now that are just simply, I'm going to go from the stretch. And you hear from the pitching coaches, well, it's easier to repeat a delivery when you don't have all these moving parts. But maybe they're onto something. Maybe they're starting to realize that if I just simply break my hands and, as Rivera said, just pick up my leg and not worry about balance. There's dynamic and there's static balance. It's balance while moving. That's really what it comes down to. That's no different than what a shortstop or the catcher's doing. Maybe it's coming back, or some of the pitchers who are not having success or arm pain are realizing that less is more, which really gets back to them understanding this whole top-down that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think I had Kurt Schilling on my podcast yesterday, and he was fired up. We went into, if anybody listened to that, there's some really good inside information on how we looked at pitching. Today's coaches would scratch their head, and say, but Kurt made a point. He said, I worked off the right side of the rubber. I had my toe on the right side of the rubber. I said, the only pitching lesson I ever had or tip until I got to the big leagues was in American Legion baseball, and our coach back in southwestern Michigan said, now, most left-handers start with their foot on the left side of the rubber, and right-handers the other side. Mm-hmm. So, the object was you face the hitter, you had that little hole in front of the rubber, and as you moved your leg, you pivoted just a little bit, and then you drove straight at the hitter. Now everybody's going like side saddle. So you look at Bob Gibson's motion. What a violent motion. You can imagine the momentum and the speed he was generating with that arm swing. And I think they're really missing out by not going back to that. I think the last pitcher, and I saw him a couple years at Cooperstown. He was there, I think, supporting a friend, maybe Scott Rowland. But it's Paul Bird. Paul came out of LSU, and he was the last of the pitchers that went to the arm swing. He would even do a double swing once in a while.
Yeah.
To use his motion as a tool. But most of the fundamentals of pitching were you face the hitter. You don't start, side saddle.
Yep.
You face him directly on, and as you say, you just grab the ball and go, and your body is automatically going to turn and do the right things it's supposed to, and supporting the lower half supports it and the upper half creates it.
And Jim, you know what? You talk to hitters, they love when guys are side saddle and whatnot. It makes it easier to time them. You talk to big league hitters and minor league hitters, boy, having that guy face you and having all these moving parts and the elbows flying and whatnot, That is a visually distracting. That is not a comfort food for hitters. Where I think the pitchers are making it easier. They almost look like an Iron Mike machine now, the way in which some of these guys are going side saddle and throw.
Yeah, I think it's easier, and I learned a lot about pitching from being a hitter before the DH, and you're trying to look at where that ball. It's a little more difficult to pick out exactly where that ball is coming out of, and you only have a split second to recognize it. So I think I think the lack of the wind-up and going to these set positions, and even in Little League now, your kid doesn't even know how to wind up. They all pitch from the stretch.
Yeah.
I think they're really missing out on something.
Well, I think, and let's segue over to Little League and amateurs, and you hear all the time, hey, don't throw the curveball, okay? The curveball is a pitch. The traditional mindset was until the kid's shaving, twice a week, Tony, you got to stay away from teaching them, that death pitch, as you've heard people talk. And you talk to different people, and the position I've taken, Jim, and feel free to agree or disagree, throwing a curveball the right way, there's a lot of people that are saying you're actually not putting as much of a stress on the elbow than sometimes throwing a fastball.
Oh, I would agree 100%. I remember reading Bob Feller, I think it was in a magazine, I read Bob Feller explaining how to throw a curveball. I'd go in the backyard and, I would spin it. I'd throw it maybe 30, 40 feet, but you're just spinning it. If you throw it properly, you're using your hand and your wrist more than your elbow. The pitch that's killing the elbow is guys trying to throw the hard slider the cutter shouldn't, like Mariano. That was a wrist pitch, but the hard slider was stress on the elbow. And the splitter, like Paul Richards, who was a manager for years and a catcher, he had these four great pitchers. I think you mentioned one of their names, Chuck Estrada.
Yeah,
so
sure.
They had Jack Fisher, Milt Pappas, Steve Barber, Chuck Estrada, the Kitty Corps. They were all about 20. Well, Richards explained how the slider was going to be a great pitch, and you threw it like you were turning a doorknob. Well, now, if you just visualize that, you know why they all had elbow problems.
Yeah.
And so, the curveball is that little 12-6 where you're just spinning it, and I wish the curveball could come back because, the injury that I had in '67, the Tommy John one, probably because I pitched like 590 innings and I pitched 65 innings in 1 month, and my arm just gave away, and that was on a fastball, wasn't on a curveball.
Well, and you know what, Jim? The challenge now, everything is all about max velocity, and the curveball, and you were the master at it, you probably had 2 or 3 different speed variations off of the changeup. It's just not a pitch that the experts or the recruiting people are saying has value because it's not a max velocity throw all the time.
Yeah, I think actually I used the set position to work on my curveball because it wasn't a power pitch; it was a touch and feel pitch. But and the curve basically, in my era, I would say most pitchers were fastball, curveball, occasional changeup. I wish I had known what an effective pitch, a changeup like a Johan Santana or Viola or Glavine or guys like that, how valuable that changeup was. We were never taught to throw that. It was fastball, curve, and you change footage that you can find on YouTube of me pitching to Johnny Bench in the '75 All-Star game. When I threw him that big looper, I think it was probably about 58 miles an hour, and he pulled it 600 feet foul, and he laughed at me. He said, "Throw it to me again." So the next pitch I didn't. I buzzed him inside, and then I threw it again, that big, slow curve. And he double clutched a few times and hit it okay, but it was a fly ball to left field. But changing speeds on that curveball is a very valuable pitch.
Yeah. Jim, if you had to, and I know this is a tough one, one significant piece of advice you can give to, and I believe it's about the parents. The parents are still the gatekeepers of information. They're the ones that, and I know you and I talked about this on your podcast, they have to filter out information, and there is so much information, good, bad, and the ugly, on the proper way to throw and whatnot. What simple advice? You're a parent of a 9 to a 12-year-old, because to me those are the formative years. You can learn to love the game. You can develop good throwing habits. What would you tell a parent that says, you know what, one thing that if I'm in the backyard, or if I'm getting ready to interview a pitching coach for my son, and what can we tell them?
Well, I think what we could tell them is something they're probably never going to do. Is first of all, like I said, I was pre-Little League. My first organized baseball was American Legion when I was like 14 or 15. Kids ought to just play the game for fun and recreation and enjoyment. And the competition level is happening too soon.
Yep. To
ask kids to compete at 8, 9 years old, and then to start looking at the bigger kids that are in the same age group, but the littler kids can't hit them. So somehow or other, our organized youth sports, we have to separate it by size and not by age. So we don't have the big 13-year-olds throwing against the little ones, and they got no chance of hitting the ball. They're afraid of the ball, and they're going to quit playing.
Yeah.
And to discourage parents from spending their money to sending them to these these establishments that are going to teach them proper mechanics and teach them how to throw harder. That's all starting at such a young age that, to dial it back and just play it for fun is going to be so sad, so hard. I remember going when my oldest grandson's 27 now, when I went to his Little League game in New Jersey. The parents would screaming and hollering. I told my daughter that. I said, boy, I said the best advice, if there is organized baseball for kids, the best advice for parents is drop your kid off and go to a movie.
Yeah.
And don't watch him. I said, my mother saw me pitch one game.
Yep.
Game 2 of the '65 World Series. And they would say to her, Nancy, we heard your son is a pretty good baseball player. And she said, yeah, I think he's the one that throws the ball so they can hit it.
Wow.
Somehow we have to get parents back to that mentality. So first of all, they don't strip the kids of their enjoyment so they get bored by the time they're 17. They're tired of that. Yep. Just let them have fun and treat it as recreation. It's so hard to see that happening today, but that's what needs to be done, in my opinion.
Well, I think you're right, Jim, and the reality is it's not going to be completely dialed back. Okay, the horse is out of the barn with 8 and under, 7 and under travel programs. You've got recruiters. You've got people saying, "Boy, if you don't play 4 months out of the year, you're not going to go in." The parents are they're drinking the Kool-Aid, thinking that, man, if my kid's going to be the next Jim Kaat or the next Mariano Rivera, right, we've got to overtrain and we've got to put them in competition at an early age. Well, it's exactly backwards, right? Your son or daughter, we do a lot with the softball in New York here, and you know what? As you get closer to 16, 17, there's a need to go compete. There's a need to go get exposure to the extent that you want to go play elsewhere. But up until then, in my opinion, the majority of your time should be spent what I call in free play, okay, in neighborhood play. And if you go to practice, and we understand that, but the practice should be informal. The line I use, Jim: let the children play. Let them play wiffle ball. Let them play stick ball. Let them jump off a trampoline and practice their Derek Jeter jump throws. Get the kids off the mound and let them just kind of experiment with different arm slots as they change their posture. That's what should be done to give your son or daughter a better chance to develop. But it gets back to parents need to understand and learn to say no. You don't need a pitching coach when your son is 10 years old. You don't need a hitting coach when your son is 10 or 11 years old. Go out in the backyard and pick up rocks, and like they do in Latin America with a broomstick, and just go hit. I think you're right. We're not going to be able to bring it all the way back, but the more that parents hear that, maybe will help some of them and get some of these children to get back to, because you're right, we're seeing kids at 13, 14, Jim, they hate the game. There has been so much pressure put on them, right? The parents have lost perspective. You've got parents talking to 10, 11-year-olds, hey, you got to make sure you hit because we can't afford to send you to college. I mean, what a terrible thing to tell a 10-year-old that you need to have results at 10 years old because mommy and daddy can't send you to college.
Yeah, I know. We've got the Netherlands does a good job. The Dutch with their youth programs, and they have a diamond where it says there's 6 players and they rotate every out. They rotate positions. They keep moving around, and it's just 6 players in a small diamond. I think that a lot of our little league diamonds and then getting into youth league diamonds, they really should be playing on a smaller playing field. I know when my son-in-law said, "Would you come watch my granddaughter's softball practice?" I think Casey was maybe 12 then. And, of course, he's my son-in-law. So I said, sure, I'll do that. And then would you talk to the team? Well, I think that's going to be the most boring thing going, watching these 12-year-old girls play softball. Well, they were the soundest, most fundamental. They hit the cutoff better than big league guys. Yep. And they were on a small diamond. It was no problem for them to throw the ball from third to first. And there was a lot of action in the game. And I really enjoyed watching. They had a terrific team coming out of Ridgewood, New Jersey. But, we've got to get back to letting the kids, as you said, just play ball, go out, have fun, forget about the competition, and then you reach a point where you find out, well, I'm pretty good at this, and then you want the competition. But that has to come, as you mentioned, maybe when you get closer to your 15, 16-year-old, instead of drumming it and sticking it, down their throat when they're 7 or 8.
I think you can give guardrails, and by that I mean, to just dump a bunch of balls and bats on a field, and it sounds great in theory, Jim, just go play. And children need structure, especially this generation of children. Back in the day when I was growing up in the Bronx and eventually moved here, there was neighborhood play. You learned how to play the game by playing in the neighborhood. Well, there's no such thing as neighborhood play anymore for a lot of different reasons. So I think the better facilities and the better programmings, and I call them guardrails, we're going to work on hitting today, but all we're going to try to do is just hit the ball as hard as you can and imitate your favorite player. Instead of putting them on cones and telling them to stay inside the ball and making them so robotic. The same thing with pitching. You know what? There's no mound today, right? We want you to take 4 steps and simply chuck it, and let's see where the ball goes. So I think we can help the next generation of players, but we just need to give them some guardrails as to, okay, this is what you need to do. And a lot of it gets back to pure throwing and knowing that stay away from pitching coaches until your son is shaving twice a day. Or if you're, if you're Italian, you're probably shaving once a week when you're 12 years old. But just learn to just simply let the noodle fly, as we say. And I think parents, and that's why hearing from Hall of Famers and people like yourself that understand and see what's going on, the more we tell them, Jim, the better chance that we have. But I think just providing them, Tony, great, we want the children to play. And, well, how do you do that? Well, I mentioned on your podcast, we play selfies all the time here. Selfies is we're going to pick up a ball, we're going to toss it up in the air, and we're going to smash it. And people say, well, geez, that's fungo hitting. Well, you know what? In this day and age, you have to come up with good language, good jargon. So we're going to call it selfies. And so why don't we play a game today where the hitter can self-toss it, smash it as hard as they can, imitate their favorite player, and run around bases that are not the size of a major league field? Because to your point, Jim, why do we have young people playing on the same dimensions? A 13-year-old boy, think about it, all right? A 13-year-old in this country is playing on the same dimensions as the New York Yankees and the Dodgers are grown men. It makes no sense.
No, I know. That's how my oldest grandson, Brendan, when he was that age in Ridgewood, New Jersey, did not have an intermediate field. They had a Little League field and then a full regulation field. And so he was pitching one day, and I said to my daughter, they're playing off a regulation field?
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, it's the only thing. I said, well, I wouldn't let him pitch. Well, he didn't want to have a confrontation with the coach, so he pitched. Well, 2 weeks later, he had a strained growth plate. Yeah, so to your point, yeah, they're playing off diamonds, and they're not having the games. I like what you said about the games. I'll give you an example. Brendan's Little League coach, as all of them, well-meaning, they're teaching kids how to hit, trying to teach them. And so we're in the backyard, and they're throwing wiffle balls, and Brendan has a tendency to pull out of the ball like he's going to hit it down the third baseline, and the coach is giving him all kinds of little tips on keeping his shoulder in. So when one of the other kids was hitting, I called Brendan over. I said, Brendan, you see that birdhouse on the top of the fence at Robbie's yard there which would be right about over first base? I said, see if you could hit one over that birdhouse. So his next time to turn, he rips a line drive right through the middle, right? Because his thought was to hit it the other way. But, that's what where Pepper was so much fun and so valuable to play Pepper, is you just watch that ball hit the bat, you hit it to the guy on the right, then the guy on the left, and that's how you developed your skills.
Yeah. Jim, and you just described, the new school people called what you just said, that's called spectrum training, okay? You get a guy that's pulling the ball, and instead of over cueing them up, just change the objective. And so asking your grandson to hit the ball, quote, the other way, and it sounds like his barrel was just way too early, over-rotating a little bit too much, you changed the cue. And the cue,
right.
the better coaches will use that instead of let the ball get deeper and stay back on the ball and all of this all this cognitive clutter, which right. makes it even more difficult for these kids to play.
Yeah. One of the reasons that a lot of us lefties, and I was a decent hitter for a pitcher, because of the 8 of us in my hometown, I was the only lefty. So when we played our games, anything to the right of second base, you were out. So you had to learn to hit the ball in the field.
Right.
And that's why Fenway Park, they've had like 30 batting titles in Fenway Park from left-hand hitters. And Williams and Vernon and Lynn and Boggs and so on, because, they learned to hit the ball the other way. And you don't need to tell them to keep their shoulder in to do that. You just have to point, there's the target.
Yep. Jim, I have to ask, this came in, I was sharing with some of our audience that Dr. Kaat, since you do have a degree now from St. Thomas Aquinas, the place that I would teach there, you spent a lot of years not only in that industry, but probably one of the best broadcasters for a long time. Advice to someone that, they might not be able to throw the ball 90 miles an hour or hit balls over buildings. Someone who, a young athlete, boy or girl, how can you begin or how can you improve in eventually being able to be a broadcaster? I mean, I know the former players, they certainly get preferential treatment, and as well they should, because they have insight. But any advice that you can give a high school, even a college student that wants to lecture or major in journalism or communication or broadcasting, and maybe one day they become the next Jim Kaat?
Well, I think I got good advice early on. Joe Garagiola happened to I was doing reports for David Hartman on Good Morning America, and he said, "You're going to get into this business?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I've had a couple opportunities." He said, "Well, don't try to be a network news anchor. They're not going to listen to you. They're not going to pay attention to, how you say and how you pronounce everything. They want your information." So me as a former player, I use that instead of trying to go for diction lessons to talk perfectly.
Yep.
Just get your information out there. That's what they want. And John Madden helped me a great deal in terms of just nailing it down to sports. John Madden and Dick Enberg, but I was talking specifically with being an analyst. It was like you're at the game with 3 fans. One's probably seeing his first game, the other's a lukewarm fan, the other's an avid fan. And as an analyst, you want to give every one of them a little something to take away. Madden taught me, he said, you get all kinds of notes. I used to tell Vince Scully and Ernie Harwell, I said, you guys were the real gems of this business because you had to dig up information. Right. I said, we have to eliminate it because we get so much of it, half of it doesn't make sense. And Madden said all he did, he said, I do my homework, so I want to be accurate with this player's tough, this player's soft, and then I just watch the game. So from a sports standpoint, yeah, that would be the tip I could give is just watch and talk about what you see. As far as just getting into broadcasting, I guess, I took speech courses and anything you can do to kind of enhance your comfort and your ability to communicate with people and to talk to crowds. Speech contests were great things as a kid to do that, but I would. Those are. I don't know if those make sense or not, but
well, they make.
There's college programs now. I know my friend Gabe. He's now working in the production end of it, but he took a little tape recorder and would broadcast college basketball games and make believe he was the PA announcer, things like that. That it's almost like we talked about with baseball. Just come up with some games where you have to use your voice and describe something. And that's basically what you're doing when you get into the business.
I love great advice, Jim. I think one of the things that they teach you in law school, right? I think I had shared with you, I was a state prosecutor, went to Pace Law School, and the one thing that, and I over the years have done a lot of presenting and communicating, and people ask me, Tony, any advice that you can give someone? And I said, you know what? First of all, this generation, they need to slow down a little bit, right? Yeah. If you slow down, you have a better awareness as to all of those annoying words, the ahums, the likes, the yeahs, all the things that when we're talking with our buddies in broadcasting, you need to economize your words. You need to learn how to articulate. And you can't do that if you're speaking so fast. And I think the other piece, and this was probably more from law school, you got to know your audience. You have to know who you're talking to, and you made reference to that, and I love the fact that, John Madden's advice to you, you got the dumbass over here, you got the really smart guy, and you got somebody in the middle, and you need to be able to present, and it needs to resonate to a different audience. I think that's the beginning of helping so many people that want to get into broadcasting now, Jim.
Yeah, I think, for example, in baseball, you'll hear announcers just say, well, he's throwing a cutter. Well, then I would say, now, for those of you out there, you're new to the game, what is a cutter? So you got to explain to them what a cutter is. Now, the guy that's been to 100 games, he knows, but you have to be able to cover all of those areas to communicate with your audience.
Yep, I would agree. Jim, I cannot thank you enough for the time again today. Our audience getting the opportunity to get insight from a Hall of Famer, broadcaster, Dr. Kaat, tremendous. We're looking forward to, I made reference to some big fans of yours in New York that once the weather breaks and you're maybe down in the New Jersey area, we'd love for you to come to our campus and talk and chat, and I think that would be a lot of fun to do that. So hopefully we'll have a chance to see you when the weather in New York is great, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I saw your facility, and it's not too far from where we live in Vermont either in the summer, so that'd be good to get down there and talk about the kind of things we've been talking about for the last almost hour here, I guess. That'd be great.
Jim, on behalf of all of our crew at Beyond the Ball, which is the podcast here, thank you again, and we'll be in touch very soon.
Thanks, Tony.
Okay.